Well, hi, everybody. Welcome. Grateful to be with us here at ULT San Diego for the Aquarian series. The title of today's presentation is The Ascending Cycle, given to us by Joe Miller. But before we get started, please let me, as usual, tell you of the upcoming events here at ULT. Here we go. Joe Miller's The Ascending Cycle. Next week, December 7th, the title of the presentation is The Pyramid, and this will be given to us by Wes Ammerman. The following week, December 14th, it's the astrological sign of Sagittarius, given by yours truly, Monica. December 21st, which is also the same day of the winter solstice. The title is The Christmas Spirit, given to us by Meluca Rivera. And on December 28th, the last presentation of the year, let's see, it's entitled Prajna, and that will be given to us by Dr. Eugene Jennings. So if I could just tell you about a couple of more things here at ULT San Diego. There is an informal study group Fridays at 1 p.m. on the Bhagavad Gita. On Sundays, there are two classes. 10:30 a.m., we do a group study with prepared summaries on Raghavan Iyer's book, The Mysteries of Karma. And then at 11:30, an informal group study on the Secret Doctrine pamphlets. The current one that's being studied is entitled The Logos. So we hope that you will come back and be with us as we dive into these remarkable subjects. And so, a reading. This is from Porphyry. We resemble those who enter into or depart from a foreign region, not only because we are banished from our intimate associates, but in consequence of dwelling in a foreign land, we are filled with barbaric passions and manners and legal institutes, and to all, these have a great propensity. Hence, he who wishes to return to his proper kindred and associates should not only with alacrity begin the journey, but in order that he may be properly received, he should meditate upon how he may divest himself of everything of a foreign nature which he has assumed, and should recall to his memory such things as he has forgotten, and without which he cannot be admitted by his kindred and spirits and friends. After the same manner also, it is necessary, if we intend to return to things which are truly our own, that we should divest ourselves of everything of a mortal nature which we have assumed, together with an adhering affection towards it, and which is the cause of our descent, and that we should excite our recollection of that blessed and eternal essence, and should hasten our return to the nature which is without color and without quality, earnestly endeavoring to accomplish two things. One, that we may cast everything aside, material and mortal. But the other, that we may properly return and be again conversant with our true kindred, ascending to them in a way contrary to that in which we descended hither. And now, our very own Mr. Joe Miller.
I'll share.
Yes. Thank
Thank you very much, Monica, for that reading. And thank you, ULT San Diego, for these remarkable meetings. I just would like to just express my gratitude and admiration for what's been going on with this program and the team of people that make it possible. I was on a long drive yesterday, and I went onto YouTube and I randomly chose one of the programs. I happened to be the Hanuman program, I think, which was done about 5 months ago. And I was so transported. Cliff Tillotson gave this wonderful talk, and then I was so impressed at the quality of the discussion. I was just kind of in awe about all these minds coming together. It's truly remarkable what's going on here. And uh, and I was just to be a fly in the wall in that room was just fantastic. So anyway, thank you, Jonathan and Monica and the whole team. Truth. It's really beautiful. The graphics that you present, those are attractive, and hopefully the attraction of those graphics will get people to click and begin to enter the conversation. So thank you. Let's see. I'm going to go to the view here. So Monica gave a reading of Porphyry, who was one of the Neoplatonists who was instrumental in writing down or editing Plotinus's work. And Porphyry gives this description in that opening reading that our souls, in coming into this world, fall into a kind of bondage. And that bondage is due to the blindness and a forgetfulness that we fall into. This is a very Platonic notion that the soul, through attraction to the realm of form, falls into forgetfulness. The soul, and he likens it to someone who goes abroad and immerses themselves so much into another culture that they forget their homeland. They forget where they're from. And so this is the state of our souls. And of course, in Platonic thought, it's through anoia, it's through ignorance, avidya, that the soul falls into attraction to the realm of form and falls into this bondage, which is a psychic or mental bondage of forgetfulness. And let's see, I'm going to try to see the whole thing here. There we go. And Porphyry tells us that if we are to ascend, and we're talking today about the ascending cycle, if there's a descent, if we're to ascend again, we have to do two things. We have to divest ourselves of everything of a mortal nature, which we've assumed, and we have to excite our recollection of that blessed and eternal essence. So there is something like what we call viraga, this detachment, and there's also meditation, remembering, putting the mind upon what is excellent, what is true, what is right, what is just. It reminds us of the Tibetan word for meditation, which is gom, and it means familiarity with. So to refamiliarize the mind, this sounds very much like what Porphyry is saying, to refamiliarize the mind with this original state from which we are in. So he says it's not enough just to go on to the journey. One has to let go of what one has acquired that is artificial, that is derivative, that is in the changeable, that is the cause of pain and suffering and disappointment, and to excite the knowledge of what we have lost. So this is a very it's a very universal concept, this notion that we are reascending to an original state that we have been in before. And if you think about Islamic mysticism, the soul, when it comes into the world, puts off 70,000 veils of light and puts on 70,000 veils of darkness. And that is why the baby is born crying, because it has lost touch with its original mother. These are lines from well-known lines from Henry Vaughan, who was an Elizabethan metaphysical poet. Probably his most famous poem is about the retreat, about wanting to go back to the original state. Some men a forward motion love, but I by backward steps would move. And when this dust falls to the urn, in that state I came, return. And I think we all know about the line in The Voice of the Silence about the pupil must regain the child state he has lost. So this is a universal theme that we are returning in our ascent. We're returning to something that we have lost, something that we've forgotten, this forgetfulness. Now, I think if we're going to talk about the ascending cycle, we can't avoid talking about the descending cycle. And it seemed to me as I was thinking about this subject that our notion of ascent will very much be qualified or conditioned by our notion of the descent. How do we think of the quote unquote the fall of spirit into matter? Is it an evil? There are descriptions that one could read. If you read Plato's his dialogue, the Phaedo, where Socrates is talking to his disciples and saying philosophy is a practice for death, and attachment is what blinds us and keeps us in prison. Is it natural law? Much of the theosophical writings are pointing out there's this law of spiritual involution or involvement that corresponds with an evolution, an evolvement of form. The two go together. Is it in some sense voluntary and compassionate? We'll pick up that thread towards the end when we look at a passage by A.E. George William Russell, the Irish mystic. Now, in regard to this question of, let's see if I can move this. Oh, good. In regard to this question, is the fall of spirit into matter an evil? There's a very interesting passage in the Key to Theosophy. And you could miss it because it actually gets split. The discussion gets split by the chapter change. You know the way the Key to Theosophy is. It's actually one long dialogue, and the chapters drop, but you can see it just picks up where it left off. And there's this interesting discussion between chapter 11 and chapter 12, which begins like this. Inquirer, do not some of you regard this association or the fall of spirit into matter as evil, and rebirth as a sorrow? Some of you, meaning the Theosophists. And the Theosophist says some do. Some Theosophists do regard it as an evil and rebirth as a sorrow. And therefore, they strive to shorten their period of probation on earth. But it is not an unmixed evil, however, since it ensures the experience upon which we mount to knowledge and wisdom. I mean that experience which teaches that the needs of our spiritual nature can never be met by other than spiritual happiness. And she goes on to say that it's evil in the sense that bodily life necessarily entails pain, suffering, and disappointment. This is very much the Buddha's first noble truth. And that we learn from this that knowledge alone can afford us relief and hope of a better future. Experience is necessary, and therefore rebirth is necessary, because the final goal can't be reached but through life experiences. She says our constant failure to find any permanent satisfaction in life, which would meet the needs of our higher nature, shows us plainly that those wants can be met only on their own plane. So the evil or the dissatisfaction with life actually spurs us to look for satisfaction, fulfillment elsewhere in our deeper nature. The questioner then says, well, isn't the natural result of this philosophy that incarnation is evil and painful, isn't that just result in a desire for escapism, a desire to quit life? And the Theosophist says, well, if by quitting life you mean suicide, no. But if by desire you mean simply aspiration to reach spiritual existence, not a wish to quit the earth, then I would call it a very natural desire indeed. So this desire to escape from the pain of life is a natural desire, but it shouldn't be pursued irresponsibly through suicide. Voluntary death would be an abandonment of our present post and duties incumbent upon us. And then she says this thing about duty, that duty for the Theosophist is to all men and ourselves, but ourselves last. So the goal of duty is not to attain personal happiness, but the happiness of others, or the fulfillment of right for the sake of right, not what consequences may come to us. She says, indeed, happiness or contentment may follow the performance of duty, but it is not and must not be the motive for it. So the bottom line is if we relate this to the ascent, then it is altruism, that the ascent requires us to pursue knowledge and wisdom from an altruistic motive. And 4 lines from the American poet T.S. Eliot sort of sums this up. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know that place for the first time. So, or as another writer has put it, a recovered innocence is more valuable than an original innocence. So we have the experience, many of the poets and writers, that somehow, like in the Chinese notion of the uncarved block, that we are born and banished from our mother, and experiences begin to scar and carve, and we lose this original block, and we become specialized and crucified in the particulars of life. And we want to recover this block. And one of the big secrets is that we haven't lost that block. It still exists within us. Even though on the plane of form, we do experience a compromise of that kind of unity. So ascent and descent, language and logic make us think in dual terms. But that isn't really how we should see it. Theosophy tells us to think in terms of cycles, and that's really one movement. The descent and the ascent are really one. And we're also taught to think about it in terms of analogy and correspondence. So yes, we wanted today, perhaps we're primarily referring to the large cycles of evolution. And the ascending cycle, at least that's what A.E. was referring to in his essay on the ascending cycle, was the larger evolutionary push, past the 4th round, etc. But we should also observe, for example, the cycle of the seasons in the year, how there is a descent into form, from winter to summer, the growth cycle and the reproductive cycle, and a flourishing, a fullness of life, and then the life cycle reascends and abandons these forms, and people celebrate harvest festivals, etc. But the leaves on the trees fall, and that life impulse we know isn't gone, but from this plane it's invisible, and it's reascended. The theosophical view, we're asked in the Wisdom of the Secret Doctrine to think about the larger evolutionary cycles in terms of 7 steps, and to notice that there's a correspondence in the rungs of the ladder between the stages in the descent and stages in the ascent. And that the fourth is the turning point. The fourth is the pivot. The fourth is the balance between spirit and matter. More specifically, the Mahayuga, I think I'm using the right term, the Mahayuga is 7 rounds of the 7 globes. And if each of these numbers here represent the rounds, then we're in the 4th round, but we're past the midway point. We're in the 5th root race, the 5th subrace of that 5th root race. And because I was in a national park a few days ago, I'm kind of into the "you are here" thing. So that's what I observed there. And then if we go even take a deeper view because it's all cycles within cycles, we're asked to look at these 7. In the 4th round, there we are at the 5th root race, and there's a correspondence between the 5th and the 3rd, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. This is a diagram familiar to all students who read The Secret Doctrine, and this is in fact where I based those drawings that I did on. But you can see what she's doing is pointing out the correlation between the principles within the seven principles within any individual, and the larger planetary descent and ascent. And it's interesting to think, in theosophical view, the descent is ruled by the gods of form, the lunar fathers, the lunar pitris, and they're recapitulating things that have been evolved consciously in past periods of evolution. They're recapitulating that, creating the forms, which will then be the cradle, so to speak, of the incarnating God, the descent of the solar fathers at the point of balance between spirit and matter, and then there will be the reascent. And the way she's drawn this, you can see the reascent, even though they're at the same level, for example, the fifth is slightly above the 3rd, the 6th is slightly above the 2nd. And also notice that the descending, if you look at the principles of human nature, the descending side, the left side, are the upadis, or vehicles. And then the ascent is life, mind, etc. And she says a few things about this. Just look at a few key quotes. The dark horizontal lines of the lower planes are the upadis in the one case, and the planes in the case of the planetary chain. Dark horizontal lines, okay? So you see those? Not the dotted line, but these dark, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but anyway, there's the darker ones.
Yeah, we can see.
Oh, good, okay. Of course, as regards the human principles, she says, the diagram does not place them quite in order, yet it shows the correspondence and analogy to which attention is now drawn. So that's the chief purpose, not to get too finely analytical about the order and all of that. As the reader will see, it is a case of descent into matter, the adjustment in both the mystic and the physical senses of the two, and their interblending for the great coming struggle of life that awaits both entities. So we'll talk a little bit more about that struggle in the ascent. She also points out that the Vedic teaching that there are 3 earths and 3 heavens can be analyzed on these lines. That Vedic teaching refers to our planetary chain, the 3 earths on the descending arc, and the 3 heavens, which are the 3 earths or globes also, are only far more ethereal on the ascending or spiritual arc. By the first 3, we descend into matter. By the other 3, we ascend into spirit. And the lower one, the 4th, Bhumi, our earth, forming the turning point, so to say, and containing potentially as much spirit as it does matter. And then she has a note about the twin globes, right, that are sharing the same rungs of the ladder there, the ascending one and the descending one. On its way upward, on the ascending arc, evolution spiritualizes and etherealizes, so to speak, the general nature of all, bringing it onto a level with the plane on which the twin globe on the opposite side is placed. The result being that when the seventh globe is reached in whatever round, the nature of everything that is evolving returns to the condition it was in at its starting point. Plus, every time, a new and superior degree in the states of consciousness. So it sounds very much like Eliot's will return to the place and know it for the first time. And if all of this sounds familiar, we should, bring it back to the fundamentals. I'm going to ask Monica to read us this little section from the third fundamental. And Monica, if you're talking, I think you might be muted.
Okay, go for it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Third fundamental of the secret doctrine. No purely spiritual Buddhi, divine soul, can have an independent conscious existence before the spark which issued from the pure essence of the universal sixth principle, or the oversoul, has A, passed through every elemental form of the phenomenal world of that Manvantara, and B, acquired individuality, first by natural impulse, and then by self-induced and self-devised efforts, checked by its karma, thus ascending through all the degrees of intelligence, from the lowest to the highest manas, from mineral and plant up to the holiest archangel, Dhyani Buddha.
Thank you. Sorry, keep going. Yes, keep going.
The pivotal doctrine of the esoteric philosophy admits no privileges or spiritual or special gifts in man, save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit throughout a long series of metempsychoses and reincarnations.
Thank you. So anyway, a classic statement, the way this is written, and this notion that there's first the natural impulse represents this descending cycle, and that the self-induced and self-devised efforts, checked by karma, are the ascending cycle that must be done consciously and creatively. And the secret doctrine gives us this idea that we're to look at the involvement of spirit in matter as a movement towards differentiation and individuality, and that the differentiation of matter corresponds with this. So all form represents an involvement of intelligence, and the evolution of form first occurs through this natural impulse, through what the secret doctrine calls the work of the lunar pitris. And then that once consciousness is involved, it must evolve. It must continue the impulse in a self-conscious, as we said, a conscious and creative way. And as it ascends, as it works, as it develops continuity of consciousness, it no longer has this reliance on the gross forms, and the matter is eventually dissipated and brought back to its original element as spirit self-consciously ascends.
Mm.
And if we want to think about the self-devised and self-induced methods, I think it's very important to think about the power of questioning that is awakened with the the so-called fall of spirit, the second fall, the awakening of manas. And there's a very interesting passage by Sri Raghavan Iyer, and I'm going to ask Michelle if she would read this. There's a portion of it here. The passage is larger.
Self-questioning. It is central to the entire teaching of the Gupta Vidya that whilst metaphysical differentiation through consciousness is indispensable for there even to be self-consciousness, this is fundamentally different from the difficulty for a ray of spirit when encased in matter to rebel against inertia. There are many modes of inertia. Spiritual inertia, which is the refusal to climb. Mental inertia, which is the refusal to think. Moral inertia, which is the refusal to take a vow or make a resolve. Psychic inertia, which is the refusal to be awake and responsive to the rhythms of nature and the extraordinary gifts of human life. None of these can be blamed upon the metaphysical differentiation of consciousness, and the purported second fall itself marks the awakening of that questioning spirit which is the signature of humanity's divine origin and is essential to overcoming all inertia. The ancients were masters of the art of self-questioning and interrogating nature. They knew, as does every great scientist or artist, that if one knows how to ask and how to wait, nature will never refuse to speak. This is above all true in the realms of philosophic religion and spiritual enlightenment. From the start, the pilgrim who enters a period of probation must see the whole of human existence as a profound process of learning, loving, and living. From Sri Raghavan Iyer, The Fires of Creation.
Thank you, Michelle. So to question is the ability to stand apart from self, or to stand apart from our habits or what is familiar to us, or our thoughts, our feelings. It is essential to self-consciousness, the ability to imagine a self. So the power to question is this divine gift. It's actually a kind of a fire. If you think about the bondage of consciousness to habit, to prejudice, to thought structures that are conformity to society, whatever it might be, there is this fire within self-consciousness that can break this up through questioning, through self-questioning. And it reminds us very much of that statement by H.P. Blavatsky that you cannot build a temple of truth by hammering dead stones. The foundations must precipitate themselves like crystals from the solution of life. So that's a alchemical notion, but it's so rich. If questioning is the wielding of non-being, if questioning is the way we break up concepts, we are creating, in so doing, we're creating a solution, a solvent. And in that solution, there may be crystallized what is creative and new and truly needed. So so it seems to us the self-devised and self-induced methods are illuminated by thinking about this very common psychological state of questioning. And while we're thinking about ascent and descent, there's this incredible statement from The Secret Doctrine. And if Monica, if you would read this for us, please.
The martyrdom of self-conscious existence. Starting upon the long journey immaculate, descending more and more into sinful matter, and having connected himself with every atom in manifested space, the pilgrim, having struggled through and suffered in every form of life and being, is only at the bottom of the valley of matter and half through his cycle when he has identified himself with collective humanity. This he has made in his own image. In order to progress upwards and homewards, the God has now to ascend the weary uphill path of the Golgotha of life. It is the martyrdom of self-conscious existence. Like Vishvakarman, he has to sacrifice himself to himself in order to redeem all creatures, to resurrect from the many into the one life. Secret Doctrine, first volume, page 268.
Thank you. Such monumental language, such a glorious, epic view. That statement, this he has made in his own image, at the bottom of the cycle of form, of involvement. That's, of course, a statement from the Bible, from Genesis, rephrased here. Is man made in God's image? Well, he's made in his own image, if man is God. And this God now has to ascend the weary Golgotha, the path of the Golgotha of life. Golgotha was the place of skulls in the New Testament, where the hill where Jesus was crucified. So she's using this mythic language. Vishvakarman is related to the great sacrifice of Purusha in the Vedas. Everything is Purusha, and there's nothing other than Purusha. And Purusha sacrificed himself to himself differentiated himself in order to fill the world with all the forms. But there's a sacrifice that's required in ascent, and that's in self-consciousness. It's the loosening of our hold on the realm of form, our learning to pull away our identity from body and personality, and to begin to fasten our identity upon a much larger collective view of humanity, of Adam Kadmon, of being a member or a limb of the great Purusha, the original man, which is really our true identity, the self with a capital S. That this is what we have to become conscious of, or simply put, in the theosophical language, we must learn to act for and as the self of all creatures. And this is why is it a sacrifice? Because we're giving up form to non-form, being to non-being. It's a sacrifice from a certain perspective. From the realm of form, it seems to be a letting go of what is dear to the egotistic self. But from the standpoint of the higher self, it's not a sacrifice at all, of course. It's a liberation, and it's a merging once again with what we truly are and what we had once upon a time. Speaking of the weary Golgotha of life, this is the Kaibab Trail out of the Grand Canyon. I took this photo 2 days ago, and all these pilgrims climbing their way out, but some are climbing in. But it occurred to me, I had a conversation with a young man from Italy who told me that he climbs the Alps all the time, and he said, when you climb the Alps, you do the hard part first. You climb up, and then going down when you're tired later on is relatively easy. But he said when you climb the Grand Canyon, which is a negative mountain, you do the easy part first, and it fools you, and then you have to later on do the weary climb. And of course, there's lots of warnings about that. It's a psychological thing. A lot of people get stranded because they think it's so easy going down that they'll easily get back. So there's a lot of rescues, and the Park Service says, descent is voluntary, but ascent is mandatory. That is, if you value your life, you have to do it. But I was thinking, isn't this kind of like what we're talking about? In some sense, the descent of spirit into matter led by passion, led by identification, led by the passive part of ourselves, that enmeshment is easy. And then we have to come to terms with universal responsibility, with illusion, with effort, with altruism, compassion, all of that. It has to be consciously done. And so I think it seems to me there's very much an analogy there. Now this is a little different than the other wheel that I showed. This is from the Gita. But it seems very relevant when we're talking about the ascent of the ascending cycle, the ascent of consciousness. And if you'll remember in the third chapter of the Gita, the Yagna Chakra, the wheel of sacrifice, is described, that in the beginning Brihaspati made man, and at the same time that he made man, he also gave him the instructions for dharma, for yajna, that man's welfare is connected with the gods' welfare, that the intercourse between mankind and the gods, the higher and the lower world, relied upon men honoring the sacrifice. And that's where the great wheel of sacrifice is given, that rain is what produces food. Food is what nourishes beings. Beings perform action, but all dharmic action has to be sacrifice. And that sacrifice in turn creates the rain. And you'll remember Krishna says to Arjuna, all about that action can either bind or it can liberate. All action done other than as sacrifice unto God binds the actor. So in the healthy system, this is what the dharma of the human being is to, as he says, keep this wheel going. But he also describes a state of disease where becomes a barrier of ignorance that blocks the intercourse between the mortal and the immortal, between the gods and men. And he says those who dress their food for themselves eat the bread of sin. So we could see in some sense the short circuit of it, that the food nourishes selfish beings. The actions they perform are for themselves and their own gain. And they lose this barrier of ignorance. They fall into forgetfulness, into avidya. They lose the truth about sacrifice. They lose an awareness as separateness comes upon them. They lose an awareness of their involvement and their dependence upon the grace of the other planes and other beings. And it's kind of telling at a very physical level to look at the way rain patterns are now interrupted so much because of what we've done with carbon. So it would seem that the ascending cycle would be remembering the teaching, the interdependence, seeing the false self-contained self does not exist. The selfish self-contained self, self-sufficiency in that sense, does not exist. We're part of this larger economy and elegance and dance, and we have to follow that. So I'm going to make a couple other points, but just a little review of what we've just talked about. So from Porphyry, he says that we've, through affection for the mortal, we've become bound. And he says we have to do two things, detachment and meditation. In the Key to Theosophy, HPB says that the dissatisfaction of life leads us to search for knowledge and wisdom. Those alone can satisfy our spiritual nature, which is the real problem. But that knowledge and wisdom has to be pursued altruistically. That's the key. We can't get it if we try to search for it selfishly. Sri Iyer spoke about the self-induced and self-devised method, the questioning spirits. The fall of spirit into matter is what makes that creativity of the questioning spirit possible. And that power has to be wielded if we would climb. And in the Gita, as we just said, is we have to see all action as sacrifice. There's two more points that we'll just touch upon. And this is going to George William Russell, who's, if you don't know, that's his pen name was A.E., the Irish mystic, who was devoted to W.Q. Judge. And as a young man in his 20s, wrote a series of brilliant articles for the Irish Theosophist. When he was a single man working at a drapery store, he was, and living in communal households, his pen was on fire, and he just brilliant. But we'll save two other points that, as I said at the beginning, how we see the descent gives us keys to how we will see the ascent, and he talks about compassion and service. And then finally, his article, which named this whole talk today, I believe, called The Ascending Cycle, he gives a very interesting statement about the Theosophical movement. And this is AE at that young age, and this is the cover of a Concord Grove Press edition of essays, brilliantly edited, a very, very wonderful book. I don't know if the publisher still has copies of this, but it's well worth getting this book. It's just wonderful. And the whole collection was called The Ascending Cycle. And I'm going to ask Monica to please read this wonderful passage about the hero in man. A portion of it is on your screen.
Yes, I'll read from what I have,
Please.
the portion you sent. Okay. AE, the hero in man. Prometheus, Christ are in every heart. The story of one is the story of all. The Titan and the crucified are humanity. If then we consider them as representing the human spirit and disentangle from the myths their meaning, we shall find that whatever reverence is due to that heroic love which descended from heaven for the redeeming of a lower nature must be paid to every human being. Christ is incarnate in all humanity. Prometheus is bound forever within us. They are the same. They are a host, and the divine incarnation was not spoken of one, but of all those who, descending into the lower world, tried to change it into the divine image and to wrest out of chaos a kingdom for the empire of light. The angels saw below them in chaos a senseless rout, blind with elemental passion, forever warring with discordant cries, which broke in upon the world of divine beauty. And that the pain might depart, they grew rebellious in the Master's peace, and descending to earth, the angelic lights were crucified in men, leaving so radiant worlds, such a light of beauty for earth's gray twilight, filled with tears, that through this elemental life might breathe the starry music brought from him. If the foreseer be a true name for the Titan, it follows that in the host which he represents was a light which well foreknew all the dark paths of its journey, foreseeing the bitter struggle with a hostile nature, but foreseeing perhaps a gain, a distant glory o'er the hills of sorrow, and that chaos, divine and transformed with only gentle breathing, lit up by the Christ soul of the universe. There is a transforming power in the thought itself. We can no longer condemn the fallen, they who laid aside their thrones of ancient power, their spirit, ecstasy, and beauty on such a mission. Perhaps those who sank lowest did so to raise a greater burden. And of these most fallen, it may, in the hour of their resurrection, be said, the last shall be first.
Thank you. That is such a beautiful, moving passage. And part of what it's saying is that full immanence, what HBB called the interblending and balance of spirit and matter, should be viewed as a crucifixion. But there's this volitional aspect. There's a great love to the host that is represented by Christ or Prometheus in this descent. And it's out of compassion that the angelic lights descend and are crucified in men. And why is this so? So that there can be this transformation, as Theosophy tells us, the transformation of all of matter into self-conscious godhood, that through this elemental life might breathe the starry music brought from him, brought from the Christ soul. And I love that he says there's a transforming power in the thought itself. And AE does this so well that we learn to acquire a kind of vision, this sort of Christ vision, where we learn to see in others this heroic mission that everyone is on, though all of us have forgotten that we're on this mission. But the moment we try to see other people in terms of that, to see them as crucified gods, who have their deepest desire is to fulfill this mission and to realize who they are. And in so doing, they uplift matter. The moment we do that, it changes how we view even personal life. And he says it results in its incredible forgiving spirit, because we no longer want to judge someone who seems to have broken under the burden they're carrying, that perhaps they have taken on a greater burden than we have, and we can't see it. So it brings a kind of agnosticism and respect to other souls. So this kind of our ascent requires us to begin to see and experience life through this principle of the sacrifice of the Purusha, the sacrifice of the spirit, and to actually experience it in our everyday encounters. The other essay is called The Ascending Cycle, and in that essay he brings up what we mentioned before, that there's this correspondence between the fifth and the third root race. And he relates this to the Theosophical movement, to groups like ours that are drawn together, and puts it in an evolutionary context. In recapitulating what he learned in the Secret Doctrine, there will be existing on the earth, about the close of the fifth race, conditions in some way corresponding with those prevailing when the third race men began their evolution. Though this period may be yet distant hundreds of thousands of years, still it is of interest to forecast that future as far as may be. For the future is concealed in the present, and is the outcome of forces working today. We may find out from this inquiry the true nature of movements like the Theosophical Society. And he gives this statement from the Secret Doctrine, where she speaks of the early third root race. Quote, "It was not a race, this progeny. It was at first a wondrous being, called the Initiator, and after him a group of semi-divine and semi-human beings." So this is the early third root race. AE says he does not even want to try to explain the deep meaning of what that is. But he says we can at least acknowledge together that what is hinted at is a kind of consciousness of united being possessed by these ancient adepts. And he says, the Theosophical Society was started to form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity, and its trend is toward this ideal. May we not justifiably suppose that we are witnessing today in this movement the birth of a new race corresponding to the divine initiators of the third, a race which shall in its inner life be truly a wondrous being. I think we will perform our truest service to the society by regarding it in this way, as an actual entity whose baby years and mystical childhood we should foster. And this is one of AE's paintings that I was quite moved by, these enlightened beings lifting up a child. And finally, we should see at the end of the Kali Yuga a new brotherhood formed from those who have risen out of material life and aims, who have conquered self, who have been purified by suffering, who have acquired strength and wisdom, and who have wakened up to the old magical perception of their unity in true being. Thank you.
Ah. I'm gonna come over. Oops. See.
Judy, yes, please.
Oh, hello, Joe. Just a tremendous talk. So very profound and moving, as were the readings. And my question, I guess, is really a very simple one. It seems that when you read the secret doctrine, there are these mistakes that our progenitors, who were ourselves, of course, have made. The refusal to incarnate. The sweat-born have us despoiled our abodes. This is karma. The refusal to do one's duty. And I have often wondered if it were not for these problems and the challenges of the descent and evolution, that we would not be so miserable as we are now. The human race on this planet is in a tragic situation. There are people starving. There are people in misery from war, and we're about to have a big Christmas celebration or Hanukkah or whatever our thing is. And yet we seem to ignore the most tragic and wretched among us, which is, of course, the people to whom the Christ went. And so, do you think that if we had not made these mistakes in the descent, that we would have less misery now? Or perhaps because we have made them, we can become greater in the future, as the correlation of the third race and the ascending subrace you pointed out can be. So anyway, just take it from there.
Well, a very interesting question, Judy. The answer is above my pay grade, but that's an interesting suggestion. I think what you said at the end there. I mean, it's in like AE said, the last shall be the greatest. We have to overcome and correct the mistakes of the past, no matter what. And no, in theosophy, no mistake is a mortal sin. That is, nothing cuts us off entirely from our possibilities, from the possibilities of restoration, and except in very severe cases. But you're absolutely right. We can see, I've been reading Tolstoy lately about, after his conversion, he wrote a lot on Christianity, and he says the central teaching of Christ was nonviolence. That's the center. If you really impartially read the Gospels, that's what it is. And he says all of the hoopla that theology has placed on it is obscures this fundamental message. And he says if we really analyze society, we see that it's not held together by love and volition and service to one another. It's held together by violence and the class system and the caste and the control of the economy and all of that. So Christianity has utterly failed to be what it's supposed to be. It hasn't been, so we haven't lived up to that. And HPB says, I think in Isis Unveiled, that if the West had been true to Christianity, there would be no need for Isis Unveiled. we would have had a culture, a truly spiritual culture that's practical, and we have failed at that. But that's really all I can say on that. I'm not really qualified to get into those very occult ideas about the early mistakes and procrastination, except perhaps that some of us do experience procrastination and know that kind of inertia that needs to be fought against. Other questions or comments, please? Nathan Johnston.
Nathan?
Oh.
No
Okay.
worries.
So this might be one of those too that is like really metaphysical or something, but maybe you have some thoughts about it. Because I'm just thinking about this ascending cycle or the descending and the ascending cycle, and this wondrous being that descended in the third round, right? Or race, third race.
Of
Okay.
this round.
Of this round. Okay. But so, and then at the same time, we have the Gayatri mantram, which invites us to meditate on the splendor of this divine sun, which is like it's not the visible sun in three worlds. And so I wonder if you might have any idea. I mean, this all seems to be happening at the same time, and yet there's, of course, some evolutionary and involutionary processes going on. So I guess, the question is, I'm really curious about the celestial world and how it might relate, or what it even is. And I don't know if this is on topic, but
Okay. Well, the Gayatri, begins Om Bhu Bhuva Svaha, in all three worlds, the terrestrial, the astral, and the celestial. I think we typically relate those to waking life, dream, and deep sleep. These three, we cycle through those three worlds at one level. I mean, I'm sure it also means a larger macrocosmic things as well. The invisible sun, well, we can think of that as the logos itself, as the very sun of being, as the very impulse and source of the whole universe that's manifesting the whole universe. That is our true life and our true self and our true motive. So when we invoke the Gayatri, we're actually invoking the divine motive that lives within us. That's covered up by personal motives and that make us forget what our true mission is. When the impulse to wake up comes to us in the morning, what is our first thought? Do we think, oh yeah, what am I waking up for? Oh yeah, I've got to get that. I've got to get that done. I've got to get this. And it's no, that's not what woke us up. What woke us up was the divine motive. What woke us up is we came to save the world. That's what woke us up. That divine motive is living in our hearts. And the Gayatri, we're told, and this relates to the HPV passage we had, that we have to learn to invoke the Gayatri not to comfort our personal distress, but out of the needs of all hearts for wisdom and knowledge, which is what that passage from HPV said. Remember, she said, only wisdom and knowledge can bring us the relief we're looking for. Because we're looking for, we have a spiritual problem. That's the problem. We get distracted by all the personal and bodily and economic problems, but it's actually a spiritual problem. We lack a sense of belonging. We lack a sense of conscious unity with our mission and our purpose. So in invoking the Gayatri, we're reminding ourselves of that. And we should be able to apply that divine will into the smallest things that we do every day. And all of those tasks are part of it. We shouldn't see any of them as a part. That's what the teaching of the Gita is saying. All action done other than a sacrifice unto God binds the actor. So because we're reinforcing a sense of separate selfhood. And we're practicing that thought when we don't come from that divine motive. Jonathan.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the wonderful, wonderful talk. Thanks, Joe.
Oh, you're very welcome, Nathan.
It was Monica this time.
Hi, Monica.
First of all, hi, I just want to say thank you for an incredibly potent presentation and these ideas. You can't hear them often enough, and you put them in such a way that makes it so much more available to us. So thank you. I have a couple of questions. One is, could you talk about this idea of the various kinds of inertia? I mean, I hear that word, and I, until now, never thought the word applied to it. You said that there are various kinds. And what I'd like to know is this a process of awakening? in the sense that, say, with our 7 principles, that there is some sort of effort that we have to make to cause us at different levels to come out of this inertia. And how did we get there in the first place?
Well, I think it's the natural cycle of spirit coming into form that that the mind, that it's, you know, in order for spirit to want to become conscious, it is baited, it is carrot and stick through the passions, through the likes and dislikes. We can see this recapitulated in, you know, in the childhood of every human being, that they, through the first 7 years, they're really led, you know, by their likes and dislikes, by their loyalty to their parents, by external views of right and wrong. These are necessary for the will to be awake and alive in a body and to master the body. It's all necessary, but it is not an ultimate aim. And ultimately, all of that, our likes and dislikes, will bind us. We become prisoners of familiarity, prisoners of our likes and dislikes. And the more we reinforce them, the more we're captured. And as Through the Gates of Gold says very poignantly, no cup of pleasure can be drank except once. The next time you drink the same cup of pleasure, there's a drop of poison in it. So that we see that then the proportion changes. So this is the thing, is consciousness is captured by habitual modes of thinking, by prejudice, by fear, and that capturing is a form of inertia. We tend to go down the familiar path in our thinking and our feeling, as well as externally. We wear away the same path. So that has to be fought against. That has to be, and of course, you know, in theosophical thought, we're told to meditate on space. In some sense, that space, yes, we can think of it as an external cosmogony, but it's actually the state of the mind. It's this pure abstraction, and we can see in self-awareness that the tracks of our habits and thinking and feeling, they're like little electric wires running over the space, but that background of space remains untouched. And we have to learn to you know, brush our teeth with our left hand, so to speak. To learn to break these habits up and learn to experience the space behind these forms, which are ways of neutralizing them and opening us up to new, flexible ways of thinking and feeling.
Oh, I see. Thank you so much. The other question I had was, you made you said that all dharmic action must be sacrifice. And so I don't know altogether what you mean when you say sacrifice. Does the person who looks after his or her family, who feels completely bothered by the mundane responsibilities that they have to handle, but however irritated, says, well, you know, I got to sacrifice. Does that count as some kind of sacrifice? Or are you talking, when you say, does it become dharma when we take ourself out of the equation?
That's very good. Yes, well, of course, the English word sacrifice is awkward, and because you can mean, on the one hand, martyrdom, you know, or you can mean, you know, the suffering on behalf of a cause, or giving up things, or even being crippled or harmed, and accepting harm on behalf of something larger. That's often we talk about that, the no pain, no gain thing. Right. But but there's the other meaning in the Gita. Yagna is actually offering. It's offering. It's putting one's resources, even if they're not to be harmed, but putting one's resources, one's property, one's abilities, one's insight, one's past, putting it on the altar, so to speak, and so that it's as an offering. to counteract the appropriating tendency of the lower self to want to possess and grab and use on behalf of self. So in that sense, sacrifice are all, when the Gita says that all actions other than as performed other than as offerings to God by the actor, what it's saying is that when we act for self, when I'm acting conditionally, when I measure out a certain amount of exertion only in as much as I can be guaranteed a return, basic economics. And first of all, I'm reinforcing a sense of self-limitation. I'm coming from a position of scarcity, and I'm reinforcing that scarcity by acting in that way, and then calculating who's taking advantage of me, who's not, why aren't I paid what I should be? There's all of that. It enters into the economy, it enters into relationships. So it's talking about a kind of divine generosity where one is not calculating. One gives because it is of the nature of spirit to give. One is generous in this way, and one doesn't control the effects. I mean, think of H.P. Blavatsky, at her writing table, crucified at her writing table, for really relatively short years. I mean, we've had this movement a long time. Her writing was very, very short period, and putting out these effects that she would never enjoy, she would never see, she wouldn't know about this meeting that we're having now. But that's the thing, it's an offering. She's not controlling the effects. It wasn't conditional, it wasn't based, and so this is what it's saying, is sacrifice. Do we have to face irksome duties that go against our personality? All the time. But those are the very opportunities we have for learning generosity, for trying to take the standpoint of the higher self. Kim.
Thank you.
I was thinking about Monica's question about the different kinds of inertias, and it seems like, we could say, yes, we're trying to, restrain the ego, but particularly there are certain excellences that we could achieve in parts of our nature. It seems like that's I'm just sharing how I interpret this, because he says psychic inertia, which is a refusal to be awake and responsive to the rhythms of nature and the extraordinary gifts of human life. So the psychic nature could be responsive to the rhythms of nature, and yet our ego selfishness aspect would perhaps close us off, shut us off from nature. And then there's moral inertia, which is refusal to take a vow or make a resolve. So, our moral nature being able to commit to a higher value, to a higher vow, is the particular excellence of the moral nature. I'm reminded of, Plato's idea of the different classes of people, that the wise, their excellence is to be wise, and the guardians, their excellence is to be brave, to have courage, and the lower classes to be temperate, and it's all ruled over by justice. But and then the spiritual inertia, that happens when we refuse to climb. So there's that ascent that's because of the spiritual nature, and mental inertia, which is the refusal to think. Clearly that the mind has to think creatively and self-question. So anyway, I was just adding that to the thoughts there.
Thank you so
That's
much.
such a big help. Thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
You've actually, Kim, brought us back to the Porphyry reading at the very start, because
Yes.
he said it's a matter of letting go of and then meditating on those very excellences. Very helpful comment.
Yes. Okay, I know that Jonathan had a question for you.
Let David go first.
Okay, David, please.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I was thinking another definition of sacrifice is to make sacred. It's the same root. If we think of sacrifices as almost alchemical, the transformation of an action. But I just wanted to share one little thing that I came across recently. There's a really interesting statement in the Light on the Path and in one of the commentaries there. And it talks about, first it talks about part of awakening is the process of perceiving the contradictions within us. We have the lower and the higher self. So we're moving around between all these contradictions, and as we perceive the contradictions, then we can ascend because it clears the path, so to speak. But it's just this little thing I wanted to read, and you could discuss it if you want. Dealing with this, it says pressure on the divine part of man reacts upon the animal part. As the silent soul awakes, it makes the ordinary life of the man more purposeful, more vital, more real, and responsible. So I thought that was really interesting.
It's a
Statement.
beautiful quote,
Yeah,
David. And
That's gorgeous. Where's that from, David, if you don't mind my
This
asking?
is in Light on the Path in the
Oh, that's right.
second. I think it's the end of the second commentary.
Okay, great. Thank you. We do have a couple of comments in the chat. We thank Maria for the graphics. Absolutely. Thank you, Maria. And Nathan Johnston says to us, loved learning that AE was also a drapery installer living in a communal household. Well, there you go.
he worked in a drapery, what was called a drapery store, which I think was like a fabric store. So I don't know if he actually hung tailored draperies on walls, but
That's
yes.
wonderful. That exalted and that every day, it all rolled into one. That's gorgeous. Desiree has a comment here. Thank you, Joe. Wonderful and insightful presentation. So, Jonathan, you had something? Okay. Yes.
Hey, Joe, what a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful, the equivalent of a podcast for somebody who's on a road trip, and they'll click on Ascending Cycle. It's going to be a fantastic journey, and they'll be making all kinds of analogies about descending and ascending, and what a perfect road trip kind of thing. And also, I wanted to thank you for these wonderful drapes, Joe, that are here in the lodge. These are just fantastic. So all the drapes here in the lodge are provided by Joe. So
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
Gorgeous, Joe.
really
Thank
gorgeous.
you.
So he does a great job. And he's got a really fantastic Carol Burnett story about his drapery stories, but well, that might be another time. And I just wanted to relay a little story of when I went to the Grand Canyon, one of my several times that I've been there. And this was one time when I was 19. And you know how the male brain doesn't really mature until like 25? So we're talking about 19. And so I was on a Greyhound bus going east and with a buddy, and we didn't have any money, which wasn't very bright. But all of a sudden there was the idea of, oh, let's get off at Flagstaff and go up to the Grand Canyon. So we didn't have really any food or any money, but we figured out. So, but it was a full moon, which makes it, the plot thickens. And so we had some Gatorade and some raisins and things like that. So we thought, oh, wow, you have to get a permit. Oh, well, it's the middle of the night. Oh, well, it's the full moon. The 19-year-old brain, right? So we thought, okay, we're going to go down because that's the easy part anyway. We'll deal with the other part, coming back up later. So we get going, we're about halfway down, and there's these two guys that are laying down on the trail, and one of them is like contorting and twitching and stuff like that. He had dehydration, and his friend says, my friend is dying. Can you take care of him? I want to go up and find some rescue people. So we did that. And we ended up giving them all the raisins and the Gatorade mainly, Needless to say, our trip kind of ended because we were out of everything. And the next morning we walked back out, and I got back on the Greyhound and kept going. So I don't know that there's a moral there.
Well, you kind of showed up to help somebody, it seemed.
I guess it was good timing.
Yes, timing.
But anyway, it's a Grand Canyon non-story. So that happened.
You were their helper.
There you go.
So
I think the moral is that the light of daring burns bright in 19-year-olds.
Well, there you go.
Well, they talk about the prefrontal cortex and mine wasn't really developed at that time, I don't think, but the heart was there, I guess.
Just
So
what I was gonna say,
anyway.
the heart was
So,
totally in.
anyway, thank you very much, Joe. Just an extraordinary presentation, as always. And just thank you for doing this. So all the thought, wonderful thought. So,
There's one more chat,
but you wanna,
Jonathan, if you want to just,
what do I do?
Look
I
in the
have to find
chat.
my glasses.
I'll do it if you want.
Oh, yeah.
Later, darling.
One more comment. Let me see.
Oh, yes. About the Grand Canyon, yeah, that's a good story.
The light, Kim says the light of daring leads to salvation. Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, I think that was the last one.
Say that, dehydrated man.
So,
All right.
any more questions
No, I think.
before we close? Oh, we are. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. for coming.
Thanks.
Once again, I'd like to tell you, please come back for next week's presentation, the title of which is The Pyramid. And that will be given to us by Wes Ammerman, absolutely. Well, be well, safe, everybody. Namaste. And Joe, thank you so much. Beautiful.
Say, Joseph.
Remember.
Thank
Good
you.
one.
Take good care.
Mhm.